With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can listen to every power play, slap.
Welcome back to Squawk on the Street. Medtronic, certainly a company that has been at the center of many conversations involving our response overall as a country to the COVID-19 virus. Omar Ishrak has joined us a number of times as the company's CEO. Today, though, he is actually day one of as its executive chairman, and we're happy to have you back, Omar, once again. While I certainly want to get to a discussion about ventilators and the production of those, I thought I'd start off on Medtronic's business right now. You gave us an update on April 21st. What are you seeing in terms of demand from hospitals, which we know have been hard hit as a result of the reduction in unnecessary or elective procedures, and perhaps they're pulling back from future orders? What is the impact that's having on your business, and how long do you see that continuing?
Well, a number of things. First, it's great to be back, and I also want to congratulate Jeff Martha, who's taking over as CEO, and the transition's going extremely well, and I'm excited about what he can do for the company. But going directly to your question here, obviously, as we mentioned in our recent release, we've had a significant impact in procedures based on hospital procedures going down. But what I want to emphasize is that there are a number of these procedures which contribute to a significant portion of our business, which are actually urgent procedures, not elective. These are for heart attacks, for strokes, things that have to be done and care has to be given to the patients, without which the mortality rate will increase. And we're actually seeing an increase in mortality rate, which are non-COVID related, because of a lack of heart failure and stroke procedure, amongst other procedures. So we are working very closely with hospitals who are ready to accept those patients. We feel that there's a fear amongst patients of visiting hospitals, and hospitals want to assure patients that if they have an issue, dial 911 and get to the hospital. They need that treatment. And I think that is what we're focused on, to make sure that patients who need care get care. And we're doing everything we can with all our capabilities to address that issue. Hospitals are prepared to take this on, and we have to help them and help those patients get the care that they need. It is extremely urgent. The elective procedures are a little longer term, but the recovery there will happen as well.
It will. You obviously reported U.S. weekly revenue declined about 60% year-on-year on average. Yes. The rest of the world down 40 to 50%. I mean, numbers of which, of course, I'm sure you never anticipated, like so many other people who run other companies never anticipated. How long do you think the rebound will take?
Well, that's obviously difficult to predict and almost impossible to be correct about it at this point. We do think that in healthcare, especially the urgent cases, the ones that I just mentioned, the recovery will happen quite quickly. It'll have to. The mortality rates are increasing at a rate that is not acceptable by anyone, and I'm sure that we will work together to address that problem. We just cannot let that happen. So we think in the urgent procedures, which are critical, the recovery will be relatively quick, and that'll happen in the U.S. and Western Europe and other countries around the world. The elective procedures we're working on to also provide sites of care which are safer, to provide hospitals and physicians with capabilities that they can do. That's much more difficult, like I said, to predict, and will probably take a little longer. But the other point I want to make that, Medtronic has a very strong balance sheet. We've got ample cash in hand. We will see through this. We will see through this, and we will emerge stronger and better. And we think that, again, the urgent procedures are the ones that are the highest priority, and then we're working with our physician partners and hospital partners to set up sites of care so that the more elective procedures can also proceed. Remember, they're elective, but they're necessary as well. I mean, no one's doing this for no reason. Right. And over a period of time, that'll become pretty important.
Yeah, no doubt, and very important, obviously, for the hospital systems as well, as we know, which certainly need some help. But Omar, when you're dealing with a lack of visibility as the company's executive chair now, and your new CEO is dealing with that, do you have to pull back in certain areas? Are you continuing R&D at the same level? Are you continuing production at the same level? I know T&E has been cut because nobody's traveling or is come down, but how do you approach it, given you just don't know what the future holds?
Well, there are a number of things. First of all, we make healthcare products, and all these products are for patients' benefit, and a lot of these are urgent. So the urgent procedures manufacturing has been maintained at the levels that we had before, because that's what's required. The safety of our employees are critical, so we've got procedures in place to maintain the appropriate social distancing and other procedures. And so in the manufacturing area, we've kept us going at close to our original rates, pre-pandemic rates in most areas. Equally, our salespeople going in and supporting physicians, they're doing that without any compromise at all. Obviously, with the procedures being down by the rates that you talked about earlier, that work is somewhat limited, but our production rates are going at pretty much up there. Now, over time, we might have to reduce it a little bit, but we'll watch and see. R&D we're focusing on to the degree that R&D can be done without having to go to work. That we're doing, and there's a lot of commitment from engineers who want to get the program done through remote work, and that's actually holding quite well. In areas that they have to go into work, where the lab work is necessary and they have to work with each other, we're trying to prioritize that as people return to the workplace, those areas where we can accelerate their graduated re-entry into the workplace, so that engineering programs and R&D programs can be maintained. We have a very exciting pipeline in front of us, lots of revolutionary products, in fact, in front of us, which we're excited about launching, about things that will really impact patients, and we don't really want to delay those. The third area is clinical trials. I mean, those have been slowed for obvious reasons. And again, over time, we will bring those back. But R&D programs are a pretty high priority for us.
Omar, it's Sarah. A few weeks ago, there was a lot of panic about how many ventilators we had in our hospitals here in New York and across the country. Are there any shortages still going on? Are there any states that haven't been able to get the ventilators that they need? And globally, is this an issue still?
Well, I think in the U.S. the situation has stabilized as the needs have become, more understood, and it looks like there are enough out there. However, the use of ventilators and the appropriate, the right ventilator for the right patient at the right time, those protocols are still being developed. And that's why you see a mortality rate that differs from state to some degree, which this application of ventilators and the protocols as they're being developed will improve over time. So that's the kind of work that's going on in the U.S. We're still allocating according to clinical need, but that process, I think, is progressing. Outside the U.S., however, especially in Asian countries where this pandemic hasn't really fully hit, those countries are highly underprepared to take this on if it reaches the state where ICUs are required, where critical care is required. And so we're doubling up in our manufacturing to support these countries where, the populations are much larger. They're building ICUs from scratch right now and have a very high demand for ventilators, and we're in the process of trying to fulfill them. The third-party partnerships that we've created from our open source agreement that we talked about, a few weeks ago, that has really moved very quickly. We'd mentioned a production rate of about 1,000 ventilators a week out of our own factories by June. That number, through our open source partnerships, will increase dramatically, maybe double that number by around the June-July timeframe. And through that, we hope to serve these emerging markets where not only do they need the ventilators, they need training, they need help in setting up the ICUs, and we need to be prepared because, the potential of a much larger crisis is always there. We hope to prevent it, and we hope it doesn't happen, but we must get prepared.
Absolutely. You referenced this, but there's a new study out that showed of the 12% of patients with COVID-19 in the New York area, New York's largest health system, that did have to have ventilators, 88% of them did not survive. Why are those numbers so high?
Well, first, these patients are in critical state. And also those numbers vary according to state. I think the numbers in Florida are a little better than that. We found that the usage of ventilators a little earlier in the process is probably warranted. That's leading to better results. And also the weaning procedure from the ventilator is also important. So these protocols, we're learning. It's a new disease. It's something that's new to the system. It's not exactly the same kind of treatment protocol as pneumonia and flu, and so those protocols are being established. And as they're being established, we think that the death rates will reduce, and that the success rate, in other words, will improve. And use of the right ventilator at the right time is extremely important, and in other states we're beginning to see some of that impact. Having said that, even if the rate is 80% or 60% or whatever, the death rate, you still have 20-40% of people who live. So you got to make sure that we provide ventilators to patients, because we've got to do everything possible to make sure that we've put in every effort to improve the survival rate. But I do think that establishing the protocol, is something that is happening rapidly in the U.S. and something that will help that death rate go down over time.
Speaking of that, Omar, I wonder, our viewers wake up every morning and they try to look at the number or the metric that's going to tell them how we're faring versus the prior day. And for some people, it's the number of tests. Some others, it's the caseload. It's the global deaths. You must be privy to much more granular and proprietary data. Is there one number that you look at first?
No, I don't know if we have much more granular data. I think the only thing that we look at is in working with our physicians, what's working and what's not. And some of that data around death rate is something that we do look at, but that's not daily. I mean, that takes a little time to accumulate and correlate that with the procedures that happened. Outside of that, we're just looking at the same models that everyone else is and trying to do a proper allocation of these ventilators to the right geographies where the need is the greatest. And so we are looking at the University of Washington data, the other data that everyone else is looking at, to make sure that these ventilators are moved to the right place. And we also have a loaner pool, which is our own rental equipment and so on, which we also use, and we deploy that in the same way. So those are the two things we look at: the death rates, the way in which the pandemic is increasing in different areas, and through that establish our allocation process. And the other is look at protocols and look at the death rate and see if we can make sense of the protocols and try to train people to use the right protocols to improve that death rate in various states.
And finally, Omar, you mentioned it's a learning process, and we are still learning. Are you surprised how little the medical profession seems to actually know on the front lines at this point about how to effectively treat the virus?
Well, look, this is something new, and I think the medical profession, is highly qualified. They're the best in the world, and they're doing everything that they can. I'm not, that surprised because it is something that hasn't happened before. In fact, the other way around, I've been impressed at how innovative the physicians in particular have been with the limited resources and the limited data to do the best they possibly can under a lot of pressure. So we have full support for these physicians and are actually highly impressed by the work that they're doing. And, this is a situation which is completely unknown. It happens all of a sudden, and you've got to use your best judgment with the best data and make decisions on the spot. So given those circumstances, I think the physicians have done admirably well. And, our support goes out to all the frontline workers out there for the work that they're doing.
Without a doubt. No doubt about that. Omar, always appreciate your joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Dow 24K is back. We're going to try to hold that as the Dow's going for the first 4-day win streak since early February. Squawk on the Street's back in a moment.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search classic Game Replays to start listening.
Did you know TuneIn doesn't just live here on your smart speaker? From the audio that moves you to the audio that gets you moving. Soundtrack your every movement with the free TuneIn app. Available on your phone or tablet. Download TuneIn from the App Store today.
You love listening to ESPN Radio live on TuneIn, but did you know you can also listen to favorite ESPN shows on demand? Get the latest takes from Stephen A. Smith,
dynamic duos all over the place,
Dan LeBatard, and Garlic and Wingo when it fits your schedule. And listen to episodes of Pardon the Interruption.
Pardon the interruption, but I'm Israel Gutierrez, and I love hosting the show with my humble...
Around the Horn and Highly Questionable as podcasts anytime you want. Search ESPN to see all the podcasts on TuneIn.
While you wait for baseball season to begin, TuneIn has dug into the archives and blown the dust off some of the classic games in MLB history.
There it goes, 3-2 pitches, hit in the air and hit well. Center field, Bader back, at the wall, it's gone!
Get yours.
One top strategist says the gradual reopening of the economy will play a big role in determining whether stocks can continue to move higher from here. That's on tradingnation.cnbc.com. More Squawk on the Street on the other side.
Wi-Fi connection spotty? Make sure you're never without something to listen to by offlining your podcasts on TuneIn. Just find your favorite podcast and tap the three dots to download the episodes you want to hear. When you're off the grid, you'll find all your offline audio under your favorites.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with a TuneIn podcast. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Welcome back to Squawk on the Street. I'm Eric Chummy. Stocks are moving higher this morning with most sectors in the green. Energy has been an outlier lower today as oil continues to plunge. Financials, though, are outperforming today, led by stocks like Huntington Bank Shares, Citizens Financial, Raymond James, and KeyCorp. A slate of insurance-related companies are also leading the sector higher, including Principal Financial, Assurant, Global Life, and Prudential. And some of the big banks are all up more than 3% this morning, including JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Citi, and Bank of America. Sarah, I'll send it back to you.
Eric Chummy, thank you. We're going to take a quick commercial break. Checking in on how the markets are trading. We are seeing some gains after weakness last week. The overall market, S&P's up 1%. The Dow's up 223 points. NASDAQ's up almost 1%. Financials, real estate, and consumer discretionary in the lead. Consumer staples and energy are negative. 173 S&P companies report earnings this week. We've got a Fed meeting as well, and the focus continues to be on a slow reopening of the economy. Stay with us.
Did you know TuneIn doesn't just live here on your smart speaker? From the audio that moves you to the audio that gets you moving. Soundtrack your every movement with the free TuneIn app. Available on your phone or tablet. Download TuneIn from the App Store today.
Keep up with everything happening in the wild world of pro wrestling with a TuneIn podcast. For expert analysis straight from the WWE to Steve Austin's no-holds-barred conversations with wrestling's biggest personalities, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen. With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search classic Game Replays to start listening.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
They say singing can help you remember things, so here's some tips for parents out there during these tough times.
Confidence. Don't get mad. Get E-Trade and start trading commission-free today.
This is the investing book everyone is talking about. It's called Follow the Smart Money. And traders are lining up here to meet the authors, John and Pete Najarian, and get a free copy.
The smart money on Wall Street belongs to the big boys. They're the ones with the resources and technology to know before any of us when a stock is going to move. By following their trades the way we do, you gain their advantage and get in first ahead of the herd on the smartest trades.
You see John and Pete Najarian on TV. Whether you trade stocks or options, this is how they pick their trades. And you don't have to be here to get your free copy. Call or go to followthesmartmoney.com right now. Just take care of delivery and it's yours free. Act quickly and you'll also get this companion DVD for free.
Call 800-850-3232 or go to followthesmartmoney.com now. That's 800-850-3232 or followthesmartmoney.com. That's followthesmartmoney.com.
On Squawk Box, breaking news, investor impact, the volatile markets, pandemic outlook, the crude crash.
Just out of the realm of anything we've ever seen.
Continuing coverage on Squawk Box. Watch or listen live on the CNBC app.
As you may know by now, hundreds of publicly traded companies have received PPP loans. Robert Frank's with us with a look at who got some of those loans, who's returning the money, and why that returned money isn't necessarily going to small business. Hey, Robert.
Good morning, Carl. Well, more than 200 publicly traded companies received those PPP funds, and the total amount for those public companies now $862 million. That's according to new SEC filings compiled by FactSquared. Now, the backlash against all these publicly traded companies receiving money that was intended for small businesses escalated over the weekend with new details about the two largest receivers of PPP funds. Now, companies affiliated with Texas hotel owner Monty Bennett received over $126 million in PPP funds. Ashford Hospitality Trust, that's a REIT that owns dozens of hotels operating under the Ritz-Carlton, Hyatt Regency, and other brands, received or processed $76 million in PPP funds through 117 separate loans. They were kind of treating each hotel as a separate borrower. Now, his Braemere Hotels and Resorts also received an additional $34 million. Ashford saying in a statement that it plans to keep all the funds received under PPP, which were the result of the application process and other specific requirements established by Congress. And then you've got AutoNation, which is, of course, the mega dealership. They received at least $77 million from PPP. It used separate tax IDs for dozens of its more than 300 dealerships. The company saying after a Washington Post article that all the PPP funds would be used only for 7,000 employees and nothing else, and that it is now returning those funds. Now, in addition to AutoNation, we've got 12 other companies that so far have announced plans to return that money, totaling $95 million. Those include Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, you've got Shake Shack, Sweet Green, Manning and Napier, they're the investment management company. The SBA is saying that eventually all this money will be recycled and go back into other loans, but it's unclear whether it goes into that first $310 million program, $350 billion program, or whether it will go into the new $310 billion program that starts today. But either way, the SBA is saying that some way or other, this $95 million that was returned will go back into the system. But again, we've got over $860 million that went out to publicly traded companies. So most of that is staying with those companies, guys.
Yeah, you would hope it goes back into the system for small business. Robert, thank you. Robert Frank. Yeah. For more on this new round of PPP funding that was made available just within the past half hour, we are joined by the president and CEO of Consumer Bankers Association, Richard Hunt. Welcome, Richard. So how many of these kinks, the fact that it's going to big companies and those that may not be the intended recipients, the small businesses who are on life support, how many of these problems are going to be fixed this time around?
Well, thank you very much and a very good morning. Keep in mind, 96% of all loans distributed in the first tranche went to those businesses seeking $1 million or less. So yes, you do hear stories about people where the program may not have intended to go, did receive them. But yes, we're working with SBA and Treasury and Congress, those monies that have been returned, hoping to get out into the accounts of small businesses. We're working night and day, 24/7 to see if every single person in this country who's affected by the virus can receive money immediately. We just started the second tranche, a little bit of a rough start. We think it is better now with the SBA E-Tran system. That's our number one goal, is to get money into the hands of the people who need it the most.
Is there enough money for that?
I don't know. The Secretary of the Treasury said yesterday it would be turned a success if all the money is distributed. This is a very much in-demand product. Personally, we think every dollar is accounted for already. When this tranche is evaporated, we'll take another look and see how many loans are still in the pipeline. We think there are more loans in the pipeline than there were distributed during the first go-around.
What can you tell us about the community banks' participation versus the large banks? Has it been easier, smoother?
Yeah, so it's a totally different banking model between community banks and large banks. There are 5,000 lenders who are participating in this program. Some people have more stringent know your customer regulation overhaul than other people do. But look, this is great. Small banks, regional banks, large banks, even fintechs and credit unions all joining together to make sure we get money out to the American business person as soon as possible. I think while there's been some glitches, this will go down as one of the best periods of time for the banking industry. This program did not exist over a month ago. The SBA usually does 58,000 loans per year. 58,000 per year. We're now looking at probably doing 3 million. From $20 billion in disbursements to $600 billion. More loans in 12 days than in the previous 14 years.
Sir, am I better off if I'm a small business looking for the money now, going to a small community bank as opposed to a larger lender? Am I going to get my money more quickly?
Well, if you're not in the application process now, the odds are not very good that you're going to get an application approved in this tranche. Several of our banks have already told potential applicants not to apply with them because they're not sure they can make sure they can get everybody through their current system. Congress did appropriate more money to community banks and banks between 10 and 50 than they did the large banks. I think the large banks have their hands full right now processing what they have. That's why they processed existing customers first. They knew them. They could process the loan, so there would not be a bottleneck for non-customers coming into the banking industry.
Richard, finally, I know there's been anecdotally some issues finding the link online for new applicants today. I just wonder, I mean, any advice for people who are in the market for this relief? And in the end, are we going to look back at and say that execution was the real problem here or the lack of funding overall?
Sure, look, I know today is Monday morning and everybody can Monday morning quarterback, but surely we can go back and look, what did we get right? What did we not get right? One of the things maybe we should have done, Congress should have done, is only allow those loans under $1 million and let the larger loans go to the Main Street lending program. A lot of investigatory committees will be happening after this is all said and done. But the number one objective today, this moment, is to get money into the hands of the small business person.
And did you say that if you haven't already submitted a loan, it's too late?
It may be too late for this tranche. Sure, it may be too late for this tranche. We have, I think, some 3 million applications already in the process to be dispersed. It's going to be very tough if you're not in the system right now to do it. This program came available about a month ago. We're going to take a pause when all of this money is run out and see how much demand is still left. Then Congress may have to reappropriate.
Richard Hunt, thanks for joining us. Keep us posted.
Thank you.
From Community Bankers Association. Carl?
All right, guys, thanks very much. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Squawk Alley. I'm Carl Quintanilla with Morgan Brennan and John Fort on this Monday morning ahead of a very busy week. Earnings season, of course, busiest one of the season. We'll get a Fed meeting on Wednesday. We've reclaimed Dow 24K, Morgan, and now the best month stat we've been watching on the S&P has got to go all the way back to December of 91 to see a better month than the one the S&P has put into place so far this month.
Yeah, just to put in perspective, not only how far and fast the markets fell coming into the end of March, but how quickly they've rallied as well, which I think really speaks to the fact that you have two camps of investors out there right now. You have the folks that believe that we could see a retest of those March 23 lows, that's still on the table, especially as we do get more data points, including some of the ones we'll see this week, earnings, potentially more guidance pulled, just some of those numbers in free fall and what that could mean from a fundamental basis. Also, the fact that you have that first read on GDP for the first quarter as well, jobless claims, some of these other key stats. And then the other camp of those that are really looking past what's already baked in as very painful and devastating numbers right now, both from an earnings and econ perspective, and are really focused on what reopening looks like. We've got something like 16 states that have already put forward plans to begin reopening and lifting restrictions to parts of the economy. Plus, you're seeing some of those efforts take place in Europe as well. Key to all of this, though, John, is testing and treatment, something we're going to talk about in this hour.
We are certainly also want to mention the major indices higher, all of three of them, the Dow, the S&P, and the NASDAQ, by about 1% as we look at this very active week in earnings season, particularly in tech. We're going to get Microsoft and Amazon earnings Wednesday and Thursday. Everybody likes to focus in on the cloud lines in those earnings because those are the two biggest players. And I think the question on cloud for them is going to be which customers are using more services than in the past, which customers are using fewer, and then as we start to look out beyond the second quarter, what's the impact likely to be in the second half of the year? Are those companies even going to be willing to give any guidance in that direction? But for now, let's get to our Meg Terrell, bringing us a special guest, the President and Chief Scientific Officer of Regeneron. Meg.
John, thanks so much. And Dr. George Yancopoulos joins us now. Dr. Yancopoulos, thanks for being here this morning. You guys presented what were some of the first real controlled clinical trial data in a drug for COVID-19, and it was kind of a mixed result. Help us understand how we should think about the prospects for Kevzara for helping these very sick patients.
Well, before I answer your question on Kevzara and COVID, in a different world, in a different time, we had some other huge news today. You know, at Regeneron here, we're focused on trying to help people suffering from all serious diseases. And we have to remember, lung cancer is still the #1 cancer killer in America. We just announced today that our cancer study in lung cancer was stopped early because of overwhelming efficacy. In the field of immuno-oncology, this has been a very challenging cancer. There's only one FDA-approved agent in this class, monotherapy in first-line lung cancer. So these are really important results. We have to remember that worldwide, almost 2 million people die a year of lung cancer, about 200,000 in America alone. So this is really important advance for patients and for physicians who are treating them. I understand the focus on coronavirus. We have that as well, so I want to get to that as well. So, yeah, we released some of the first results coming from large and well-controlled studies. I think that the results are very cautious at this point. What we showed was that in one population where small uncontrolled studies and even controlled studies, but of small size, had suggested great promise in the so-called severe patients, those who are hospitalized and requiring oxygen but not on ventilators, there did not appear to be a benefit for those patients. There was a potential benefit for the more critical patients, those that are hospitalized and on ventilators. The Independent Data Monitoring Committee recommended that we stop exploring the severe population because apparently the lack of benefit, but suggested we continue to explore the potential benefit in the critical population. But I think it shows why we as a community, even in these desperate times, we can't just be using drugs, trying to repurpose drugs for new purposes and counting on small, even controlled studies. We need to be doing the large, well-controlled phase 3 type settings that are really the standard in the industry and that the FDA demands of us. And if we don't do that, unfortunately, I think there's going to be a lot of false hope and a lot of people being treated with medications that may not help them at all and might even hurt them.
And it's important to note also that this drug is completely separate from a new development program that Regeneron's working on for a new drug for COVID-19. Tell us about the progress in that area and when you plan to start human clinical trials.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, Meg. So as I said, The Kevzara is a repurposed drug, an existing drug approved for rheumatoid arthritis that small studies from China first and other places suggested might be useful for coronavirus. The history of repurposing existing drugs is not really a very fruitful one. What has historically worked better for us and for the industry is making specifically designed targeted drugs against the disease agent of interest, in this case, the coronavirus itself. So using the same tried and true approach that we applied for other programs, most notably Ebola, where we produced a very effective treatment for Ebola in the middle of that epidemic. We used the same technologies and the same approaches to make highly targeted antiviral antibodies, they're called. It's the agent that vaccines try to generate in the body. We can make them outside of the body and give them back to people so you don't need to be vaccinated. We've reported that the progress on that front has been astoundingly impressive. We set the record for Ebola in terms of going from starting the program to clinical trials in 9 months. For the coronavirus program, we're going to break that. We're going to be in clinical trials by June, which will be 5 months. With this very specific targeted approach against the virus, I think there's a lot of reason to have hope for that and more confidence in that targeted approach than the repurposed drug approach.
Hi, this is Morgan Brennan. I can't wait to see how all of that plays out. It sounds absolutely fascinating. I want to take a step back, though, and just ask you what is probably a very rudimentary question. But when it comes to some of these trials, how do you decide who actually gets the treatment and who gets the placebo? I get that it's so important to have a control group in these trials, but I would imagine at a time like this, it's even tougher than usual to make those decisions.
Yeah, well, first of all, we worked in partnership with the FDA, with BARDA, the rapid response arm of the Department of Health and Human Services. We worked with New York State, with the governor's office. And what we have to recognize is that if you don't do controlled studies, if you just count on these uncontrolled studies, you get misleading information. That was, I think, the case maybe with this class of drugs. People thought it might be a panacea. They were saying, oh, look how well these patients are doing. They didn't realize that these classes of patients actually will do really well even without a drug. So that's why we need controlled studies. But in our study, we actually gave drug to 4 patients for every 1 placebo patient. So the majority of the patients are getting the drug. And the other patients are getting the best known standard of care at this moment in time. They were eligible. They could have gotten any of the other repurposed drugs that are around now. But we don't have evidence that any of them work. That's why we need these studies. Without these sorts of studies, we could be offering hope that's the equivalent of snake oil to the very desperate people. This is why everybody came together with us. The FDA worked nonstop 24/7. BARDA, the governor and the New York State Health Commissioner, Howard Zucker, all the great New York medical institutions first, and then all the other medical institutions throughout the country. They said, we need real answers. We can't just rely on these anecdotal small studies, whether they're small controlled studies or not. We need to have big, large data sets to convince us that these drugs really can make a benefit, and what is that benefit exactly? And so that's why we work so hard to get this sort of data.
George, good morning. It's John Fort. You're talking about the importance of doing these studies and doing them in an organized way to get results. I wonder if you can tell us what we're learning about how government needs to communicate about these things in these crisis moments so that we don't get false hope, so that we don't get people clamoring for things or handing out things that are unsafe. Have we learned anything that state and particularly federal government should take to heart about that?
Yeah, well, I think we've learned that there's an important standard in the medical community. Like I said, today we announced our large phase 3 well-controlled study in lung cancer. Okay, lung cancer is devastating. People who are dying of lung cancer are just as desperate as those dying from coronaviruses. But what the FDA demands and what the system demands is that we find real answers. We can't be chasing mirages. We can't be giving false hope to people. We can't be doing the equivalent of snake oil sales here. We got to be getting real answers, and that's why we have to hold ourselves to that standard, whether it be in lung cancer, where we announced the overwhelmingly positive studies today, or whether it be in coronavirus. where we announced our, cautious, possibly hopeful studies for one set of the patients, not so hopeful for another set of the patients. But we need this sort of data because we can have patients, physicians, and the medical system not knowing whether drugs work. And the history of most of these stories where you repurpose existing drugs and you try them in a new setting, the history is not that fruitful. Things generally don't work. And we don't want people just trying them because some of the time they could actually be doing harm when they're doing that.
Doctor, it's hard. I don't want to stir up too much trouble here, but it's hard to hear you talk about chasing mirages and snake oil and not think of the president's tweets about hydroxychloroquine. Are you trying to address him in a way, indirectly?
No, I think that I'm addressing the system. I mean, the president was relying on reports from academics, for people reporting small studies, from people in hospitals reporting positive data. And yeah, we all want hope, and we do, want to consider those pieces of data. But we have to recognize that before we broadly put something into medical practice and before we expose lots of patients, especially all of these drugs are active agents that could actually be causing a lot of side effects and could actually be causing more harm. So this is why it's so critical for the system that hypotheses get tested before they get widely used. This is why we have an FDA. This is why we have the greatest healthcare system in the world right here in America, because we are so rigorous about both inventing drugs and testing the drugs. This is where the innovation happens, and this is where the testing really happens. And we hold ourselves to that standard, and we're going to continue to do so, and that's how we get real answers.
Dr. Yancopoulos, it's Meg Terrell again. You mentioned that Regeneron is working with BARDA, among other partners. We saw that the director of BARDA, Rick Bright, left that agency pretty abruptly last week over some of these concerns about disagreements with the administration over what to fund. Are you concerned about any disruption in your partnership with BARDA as a result of his departure?
Well, we had enormous respect for Rick Bright. He was a real contributor. He was really helpful in our efforts, but we're seeing the same things from the new leadership, and we're hoping going forward that they can really be helpful. And I have to say, BARDA was really on point on this issue in that, they wanted to test. They were one of the first people that were saying to us, hey, let's get together. Let's do a large, well-controlled study. Let's find out, does this really work? Does it make a difference? But BARDA were also the same people that said, we recognize that the odds are against us here because these repurposed drugs, most of the time, they're not designed to fight this virus or this disease. They're more likely not going to work. We have to go into these studies with our eyes wide open. But they were much more excited, and they're also our partners on these specifically designed and targeted antiviral antibody therapies that we're also now exploring because they recognize that, first of all, it's a tried and true approach. It's an approach that worked for Ebola and it worked in other programs. And they're thinking that, hey, if it's targeted against the virus, it's specifically designed against it, let's support that. Let's get that moving. Let's get that into human beings as soon as possible and see whether we can do better with a specifically designed and targeted therapy. And that's what we're working 24/7 to do, pushing that forward so we can find out whether that therapy, that same exact approach that worked in other programs, most notably and recently against Ebola, whether it can also make that sort of a difference here in this epidemic.
Absolutely. Well, George Yancopoulos, thank you so much for being here with us today, and we'll eagerly await updates as you head toward the clinic with that program. Morgan, back over to you.
Thanks for your time.
We sure will. Thank you both. Meg Terrell, thank you as well. Quick programming note. The CEO of Regeneron, Len Schleifer, will join CNBC's Healthy Return Summit. That's a virtual event that's going to happen May 12th. You can get more details and register at cnbcevents.com/healthyreturns. All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break with markets again higher to start the week. The Dow's up about 248 points or 1%. Similar move higher for the S&P as well at 2865. Stay with us.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn. Wi-Fi connection spotty? Make sure you're never without something to listen to by lining your podcasts on TuneIn. Just find your favorite podcast and tap the 3 dots to download the episodes you want to hear. When you're off the grid, you'll find all your offline audio under your favorites.
While you wait for baseball season to begin, TuneIn has dug into the archives and blown the dust off some of the classic games in MLB history.
There it goes, 3-2 pitches, hit in the air and hit well. Center field, Bader back, at the wall, it's gone!
Search classic game replays to relive some of the great contests in America's pastime.
Ground ball out to Jackie Robinson, up with it over to Reese for one, back to Hodges, it gets away from him.
and indeed across the nation. And I think I speak for all 7 governors in our council when I say we only want to have to do this once. So, with that in mind, here are the 6 principles that will keep New Jersey on the road back, using renewed public health to create renewed economic health. Adhering to the first 4 principles will secure our public health. 1, following trends of sustained reductions in new COVID-19 cases and other key metrics reflecting a decreasing burden of disease. 2, expanding testing capacity and speeding up the return of results. 3, robust contact tracing. And 4, ensuring safe places where those positively diagnosed in the future can isolate. When we have accomplished these 4 steps, we can move to principle number 5, responsibly restarting our economy to restore our economic health. And finally, to secure our future, we move to principle number 6, ensuring our resiliency. If we follow this road, we give ourselves the best possible chance to succeed in the months ahead. Our first order of business is to secure the public's health. And as I noted, this will require us to meet our first 4 principles. The stay-at-home order, which has been in effect since March 21st, will remain in effect in its entirety until further notice. For us to move out from underneath this order, we need to see at the least a sustained reduction in the number of new positive COVID-19 test results, new COVID-19 related hospitalizations, and other metrics. And we will also need to see our hospitals step down from functioning under a crisis standard of care. We will be looking for trend lines that show 14-day decreases. We cannot look at just one day or one snapshot in time and say we've succeeded or failed. We will need to look across the length of time and to not be distracted by any statistical noise. We need to ensure that we have a robust and fully functioning healthcare system ready to meet the challenges ahead. And it's not just our hospitals, but also ambulatory facilities, long-term care facilities, provider practices, everywhere healthcare is delivered. And when we see fewer cases and fewer hospitalizations, we know our system will be prepared for these challenges. Second, we must have a significantly ramped up diagnostic testing plan in place. We need to, at the least, double our current testing capacity. I'm proud to announce that we are actively working toward doubling our diagnostic testing capacity by the end of May, and having everything in place from the kits themselves to the lab capacity necessary to ensure quick turnaround of results. As we've said many times, it isn't just the number of tests, it's how fast you get them back. We will have a flexible testing plan that is accessible to all residents who need it, whether it be through walk-up and drive-through sites, tests at local pharmacies, or even at-home testing capabilities. We will prioritize testing for healthcare workers, other essential workers, and vulnerable populations. And we will ensure that those who test positive will be linked to a healthcare provider. Our system will also be prepared to engage in targeted surveillance testing within communities to further protect against the resurgence of COVID-19 and to build data sets that can help us better understand its spread. To achieve these aims, we will need significant support from our federal partners, and we will continue to expand our partnerships with private sector labs and with institutions like Rutgers University, which have created innovative new testing platforms. And we are working closely with the White House, which has agreed to be a partner in helping us meet this important threshold. With this expanding testing in place, we can move forward to our third marker, robust contact tracing. Whenever a new positive COVID-19 test is returned, we must be able to leverage not just that individual's recollections, but also employ new technologies to help identify those with whom that individual may have come into contact. We will need to recruit and deploy an army of contact tracers whose sole purpose will be to identify these individuals, so we can follow up and ensure they do not contribute to further spread of COVID-19. At the heart of much of this effort will be our local health officials who have done amazing work throughout this emergency. And backstopping all of this will be our Department of Health and its experienced and dedicated professionals. According to national guidance, and Judy has reported on this earlier, a proper program will require anywhere from 15 to 81 persons engaged in contact tracing for every 100,000 residents. For New Jersey, this can mean for anywhere between roughly 1,300 all the way up to over 7,000 people to take on this work. But, and here's a big but, we are also actively engaging a number of technology companies in a search for innovative solutions that can assist in this massive undertaking and not only make the work of human contact tracers more efficient, but perhaps mean that we need fewer of them. And this now moves us to our fourth step in securing public health. To the greatest extent possible, we will need to provide those who do test positive in the future with a safe and free place to isolate themselves and protect others from COVID-19. We must also be prepared to support these people with wraparound services as needed. We are fully prepared that when we restart our economy, we will see COVID-19 cases. Even if we bat 1,000, even if we get everything right, we will see cases. That's not just the nature of the virus, as Ed and Judy and Christina and others have reminded us, but it is the nature of the reality when you combine it with a reopening, even a responsible, well-timed, well-structured reopening. That much we are sure about. We will see this virus again. Our goal will be to prevent these new cases from multiplying. So stop for a second. Meeting these four benchmarks, a sustained drop in the curve, expanded testing, contact tracing, and safe places for people to isolate, is critical to giving our residents confidence that we are not only in front of the crisis, but that when we do restart our economy, they should not fear going out and being a part of it. And restarting our economy and returning people to work will be done methodically, strategically, and responsibly. And that is our fifth principle. To guide this process tomorrow, I will be announcing the formation and the members of the Governor's Restart and Recovery Commission, a group as diverse as it is talented. Economists, academics, business leaders, labor leaders, healthcare experts among them, with local, national, and global experience and knowledge. It will be their task to balance multiple competing needs to ensure we arrive at equitable decisions that work for every community in our state. And I will ask them to help us and our businesses leverage any and all available federal funds and programs to support our recovery. I will give Tom Malinowski a well-deserved and robust introduction, but I don't know where we'd be without our federal partners down there fighting for us every day. I will ask the Commission to give the highest priority for reopening using a clear standard of essential and safe, beginning with businesses, industries, and activities which are not only essential to our economy, but which provide the lowest risk of disease transmission. I suspect, Mahan, we're going to want to call that chart back up, this graph up later on when we engage in some of the questions. Then we can move up the matrix, bringing more businesses and activities online until we achieve a fully functioning and open economy. As we begin this restart, however, again, expect to see the continuation of social distancing measures, including potentially requirements for face coverings in certain locations. I, by the way, have become a disciple of face coverings, period. I'm not suggesting that's what the guidance will be, but at least face coverings in certain locations. And for work from home directives for employees who do not need to report to a physical location, to pick two examples of what I think we will be living with for the foreseeable future. I want, by the way, nothing more than to see every main street up and down the state filled with shoppers and diners once again. I want our construction sites roaring with activities once again. I want to see the shore humming throughout the summer. We will move as quickly as we can, but as safely as we must. We have to be thoughtful in how we unfold our economy. This virus is now among us, and our task will be to contain it as best we can. But with our public health protocols firmly in place and with our healthcare system prepared, you should not fear heading back to work or elsewhere, and that is our objective. And finally, we cannot think of COVID-19 as a one and done. Whether we are hit with a rebound of COVID-19 or a different strain or an altogether new virus outbreaks, we have learned valuable lessons that we would be foolish to ignore. Ensuring New Jersey's resiliency for the next outbreak, and that no one will be left unprotected because of racial or socioeconomic status, must be a part of our response to this outbreak. COVID-19 showed no favorites in ravaging our state, and neither will we in preparing for the next wave. We must use this window of opportunity to fill gaps and fortify our healthcare system. I will be looking to see that our hospitals and healthcare systems, and anywhere else, by the way, where healthcare is delivered, have the bed capacity, personal protective equipment, ventilators, supplies, and staff they will need to provide the highest quality of services. At the state level, we will ensure that we too have the supplies to backstop our healthcare facilities and our first responders and essential workers. That means building our own state stockpile of PPE, from masks to gloves and everything in between, so we can properly outfit not just our frontline health and public safety responders, but also our essential workforce. And it also means we must have ventilators on hand that we can push out to hospitals before, and I say before, they hit crisis mode. Throughout this process, we have purchased hundreds of ventilators. Don't think for a moment that we're going to be sending any of them back once the current emergency ends. We cannot find ourselves in another situation where we must rely on the federal government or our corporate and philanthropic partners, by the way, around the world, I might add, to source what we need. We must build our resiliency now. And governmentally, we now have a playbook that we have put together and can refer to or hand off, by the way, to future administrations, complete with the framework for the dozens of executive orders and other processes necessary for facing a global pandemic head on and emerging stronger from it. In the course of 2 months, our entire world and our entire worldview has changed. Pandemics aren't something in a far-off place that we just read about in the news anymore. We are living it right here in one of the most advanced states, in the most advanced nation in the world. And even as we work to put New Jersey back on the road of progress and prosperity, we know that this war is still far from over. We need to continue focusing on our social distancing and taking the steps necessary to push the curves of new cases, new hospitalizations, and COVID-19 related deaths down so we can move in turn down this road. I don't know when we'll be able to formally and finally start this journey. Hopefully, if we all keep at it, it will be soon. But just as we began planning our response to COVID-19 6 weeks before our first positive test results even came back from the lab, we will be ready to put the car in gear as soon as we see a green light. This is a plan for how we move forward, not if we move forward. So let's do it together. Let's start by lowering the curve. We could do this if we all keep our focus over the coming weeks. And when we do this, it will be that much sooner that we are able to reach our destination, a New Jersey that is restored to economic health because we took the steps to restore and secure our collective health. That said, please allow me to welcome, as I've said many times, it takes a village. We need our legislators. We need our whole team. We need each and every one of you doing the extraordinary hard work, including staying home and staying away from each other, even as the weather, I'm told, will someday improve. Thank you for that. You're the single most important member of our family, of our village, because you have kept this curve flat enough to allow our hospital systems to sustain the extraordinary influx of patients. Please stay at it. We need you. And I can't think of a more important member or members of our community than our federal delegation in both the Senate and in the House, across the aisle, We have as good as it gets anywhere in America, and a great example of that delegation is with us today. Please help me welcome Congressman from the 7th District, Congressman Tom Malinowski.
You've been listening to special live continuing coverage of the COVID-19 crisis on Bloomberg Radio. In this case, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy has been giving his update on what's the situation in New Jersey is looking like. Murphy gave optimistic numbers, including fewer new cases and less usage of ventilators, and credits social distancing for the downturn. Says they do have a vision of the road to recovery. Public health creates economic health, he says, and goes on to say that prior to reopening non-essential business and recreation and entertainment, they have to know. They have to know people will be kept healthy. They will restore health and well-being to New Jersey first and foremost. Again, you've been listening to Governor Phil Murphy on Bloomberg Radio. We now rejoin our regular programming, Bloomberg's Balance of Power with David Weston. Okay, well, we're going to continue to talk to you here about what he's talking about. The Governor, Phil Murphy, says that they need to restore health and well-being of New Jersey first and foremost. They will not rush, he says. He reemphasizes that they need robust testing and contact tracing. Says they could be hiring up to 7,000 people for that contact tracing. In other words, when someone falls ill with COVID-19, they want to figure out who they've been in contact with so they can get on top of that preemptively. He says stay at home remains in effect for the foreseeable future for New Jersey, because they need to say at least 14 days in decreases in numbers before they even think about sending people back out into public. He wants everyone to feel safe before that takes place. He says they will rejoin as quickly as possible, but as slowly as needed in order to protect. As we prepare to go back into our regularly scheduled programming, I can tell you what we have going on in the stock markets, and that would be as we look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average, we are up 1.1%, up 262. The S&P 500 is up 1.25%, up 35, and the Nasdaq is up 1.1%, up 93. The 10-year currently is down 13 seconds with a yield of 0.64%. West Texas Intermediate crude is taking another beating today, not only on supply but also on demand. Currently down 25 3/4% at $12.61 per barrel. COMEX gold is up just 0.5% at $17.2640 per ounce, and the dollar yen is at 107.29. The euro $1.0820. The British pound $1.2411. Let's look at some of the stocks that have been making news today. GM is up 0.1% at $21.98 per share. Ford is at $5 a share, $5.10. That's up 4.8%. Let's look at some of the tech stocks. Twitter is up nearly 5% right now at $30.15 a share. Apple is down 0.4. They had indicated they could delay their new 2020 iPhones as they come out to lower demand. Right now, Apple is at $281.68. We return to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I am David Weston. Well, it's not just the U.S. economy that's struggling because of this coronavirus. Same thing is happening over in Great Britain. And Bloomberg Television talked to Lord Mervyn King earlier today, the head of the Bank of England, and among other things, asked him whether there needs to be a similar sort of stimulus package for the United Kingdom.
I don't think that's an immediate need now. I think both the Treasury and the Bank of England have made clear that they would provide whatever stimulus they judge to be needed. But at present, stimulus is not needed because the government has actually told us to stop working, stay at home, don't go out and spend. So they are trying to stop the economy from functioning at present. To try and stimulate it at the same time would be a contradiction in terms. So the question of stimulus is for one further down the road, and the Bank of England can take whatever measures it feel appropriate very, very quickly. So I don't think that is the immediate issue. The immediate issue is how to prevent firms and businesses from going bust. And the reason why we shouldn't prejudge at this stage what businesses will need help further down the road is that it's quite likely that no one can really know at this stage that there will be a change in the pattern of spending, people's habits and how they choose to spend their money, whether or less on international travel and restaurants and more on gardening equipment and do-it-yourself. We don't know what will happen, but it would be a big mistake to lock in now for the permanent future a pattern of spending and hence support offered to companies that would guarantee them a long-term future. What we need to do is recognize that we've suspended the operations of a market economy. We therefore should suspend bankruptcies in the short term in order to get to a point when we can start to allow the market economy to function again, and that will determine which businesses survive and which won't.
And so on that front, in terms of supporting businesses through this, we've had the CBILS initiative, the Corona Business Interruption Loan Scheme coming through from the government. Do you see design flaws, though, either in the criteria for eligibility or the distribution in that kind of scheme?
So I think the big problem with that scheme has simply been the logistics. I'm sure it's possible to design a better scheme, and with many more weeks, I'm sure the Treasury could have done so, but let's not the best be the enemy of the good. It's a pretty good scheme. I think the Chancellor might well do a good thing to extend the guarantees to 100% if that breaks the logjam of banks being cautious about extending the loans. But the real problem was that going through the banking system, which looked like the sensible way to do it, has in fact meant that we've been subject to inevitably the concern by banks either to wish to push businesses to other loan schemes on normal terms, to ask for personal guarantees, concern that the banks themselves would still be bearing some of the losses. All of this has made it more difficult as a vehicle. I think the government needs to get a grip on this and to find a way through it. Things are improving clearly from the unfortunate slow start, so it is improving. But I think they will still need to do more. I think the other way of approaching it would have been to have said that many businesses that were viable last year paid taxes to the Inland Revenue, whether it was income tax or value-added tax. We could have considered reversing those taxes, that is, allowing the revenue to repay those tax payments in the form of a loan, which later on could have become a grant if the government decided to do that. But at this stage, it's a purely logistical issue, I think, rather than worrying too much about the high-level design.
That was Lord Mervyn King speaking earlier with our colleague Anna Edwards over in London. Coming back to the United States now, President Trump this morning tweeted he has some doubts about whether we should be supporting the states. That is after Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, said that the states should be allowed to go bankrupt, in fact. Well, there's a bipartisan proposal in Congress that it would actually give $500 billion in support to the states. And we welcome now one of the sponsors of that. He's Republican Senator from Louisiana, Bill Cassidy. He joins Senator Bob Menendez, a Democrat of New Jersey, in sponsoring this bill. So let me start with you. First of all, thank you for being with us, Senator. Great to have you with us. But secondly, let me ask you, have you been talking with the White House? In fairness to President Trump, he didn't say no. He just said, I've got some doubts about this. I'm willing to listen. Can you fit your bill together with what President Trump wants to accomplish?
I think we can. The president wants the economy to reopen. And so it's not going to reopen if all these small businesses that we've spent $500 billion supporting will not reopen if a city goes bankrupt and there's not police, fire, sanitation work. They just won't. Imagine the restaurant opening its doors and there's garbage and rats in front of it because there's no sanitation. Now you might say, why would a city go bankrupt? Well, if you depended upon hotel bed tax, sales tax, and tourism as the mainstream of your city's tax base, and that's been totally collapsed, then guess what? You don't have the source of revenue. So I think the president will be compatible with it because it's not about the city and state government. It's about the small businesses that we've been doing our best to maintain with those basic human services.
Yeah, one of the things the president tweets is, look, some states have not been as prudent as other states have been. Why should they be bailed out? But we have that situation across the board with companies as well, don't we, Senator Cassidy? Is there a lot of support from your colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, for your approach?
I think there will be. We've obviously been away, but I've received phone calls from colleagues I've read in the press about people who are supportive. But by the way, there is a healthy skepticism when people in Springfield, Illinois look at this as a lifeline to get them out of $40 billion of unfunded accrued liability for a pension program which has been padded for political purposes without the discipline of being able to pay for it. This is not about that. That is about mismanagement, and we should not be using federal taxpayer dollars to bail a state out of unfunded accrued liability. What we're speaking of are the sorts of revenues that are required to keep the lights on, or more importantly, or more specifically, again, as I mentioned, the cops, firefighters, sanitation workers, without which you cannot maintain a small business. And so we need to draw the distinction, not allow it to be confused. We're about basic services. We're not about bailing out of unfunded accrued liability. Everybody's skeptical about that.
So, Senator Cassidy, let's talk about your home state, Louisiana, which has been hit pretty hard, let's be honest, with the coronavirus. What's the situation down there, and what are your views about bringing it back to life, the economy, that is?
So perfect example. The crest is passed. We've now flattened the curve. We're beginning to the governor's beginning to cautiously reopen the economy. I would like it to be driven by data, my own personal preference. I think it's the only way to know when to expand, when not. But if you look at this is the peak tourism season for New Orleans. The weather here is absolutely gorgeous. Normally you would have Jazz Fest with every restaurant, every venue, and every hotel jam-packed with people flying in to support our brand new, beautiful airport, on and on and on and on. There would be festivals throughout South Louisiana celebrating Cajun music, or celebrating French food, or celebrating the Bro Bridge Crawfish Festival. I could go on. The Strawberry Festival. All that is shut down. Now, it is shut down, so therefore all that sales tax revenue is gone, the tourism dollar, etc. Now, this was a shutdown required by a response to COVID-19, encouraged by the federal government, which destroyed tax bases. This is not mismanagement. This is a response. And all those small business people depended upon having their hotels full, they've lost. We've taken care of them as much as possible. But now we need to take care of the police, the fire, the sanitation in order to allow these companies, these small businesses to reopen. That's what this is about.
Senator, one of the reasons that we really value speaking with you is because you are a doctor. You're a physician yourself. As you say, you know the science in a way that many of us don't. Do we have the testing capability to really start bringing us back online? We've heard from Larry Kudlow that we'll have whatever testing is necessary. How much testing is necessary? And it's not just the number of kits, but are they reliable? Because we're hearing reports now, for example, some of the antibody tests are not necessarily reliable.
The antibody tests may not be reliable now, but we can know they'll be reliable very shortly. The point I've been making, though, you have to be focused. If you're in a war, you don't just diffusely put your troops all over the battlefront. You put them where the enemy is, so to speak. The enemy is the coronavirus. If you look at a city, there is data now that would break down where the hotspots are within the hotspots. So it's not every place across the city. It is in certain census tracts. And within that certain census tract, there are certain buildings. Now, that's where you need to be doing your testing. One, it allows you to identify early those who are infected so that you can proactively monitor. Two, if they are infected, Congress has given states money to quarantine and to provide the support during quarantine to prevent its spread to others. And when you do this, not only do you limit spread, but you begin to flatten the curve even more, which meets those thresholds by which you can further open the economy. I would argue we have testing enough for that already. It's just not being focused where we need it. We need to put those tests within the hotspots. That's when we get the most bang for the test.
Senator, finally, as you said, you like to make your decisions based on facts, on data. There's an awful lot of facts or pseudo-facts out there right now, a lot of data, and a lot of it's conflicting, frankly. And some of it, to be honest with you, is coming out of the White House itself. What is Senator Cassidy, where do you turn to have reliable information on the coronavirus?
I'm reading the New England Journal of Medicine, The Lancet. I'm reading there's a lot of material out there which has not yet been peer-reviewed, but you kind of get a sense of it. They are the ones who say that the antibodies that are formed from naturally occurring immunity are pointing in the direction, not definitively determined yet, but pointing in the direction of these antibodies conferring immunity. Secondly, I look at public health principles. public health principles. If you limit disease, you need to have good contact tracing. As it turns out, since this virus is so readily spread, we have to go to modern methods of contact tracing, which is what Germany and South Korea are doing, the Australians and the New Zealanders. So I also look at the examples of other democracies of how they are doing it. Right now, frankly, we've not implemented the programs they have. So when we begin to implement them, then I'll feel like we're in the right direction. So to summarize, I look both at the medical data, but I also look at success stories from other democracies, and that's where I take my kind of what should we in the United States be doing next.
Okay, Senator, really appreciate it. As I say, always value speaking with you. That's Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana. Coming up here next, we talk with Eurasia Group's Ian Brenner about the geopolitics of the coronavirus crisis. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
This probably wasn't what you expected.
Deaths from the coronavirus continue.
I can find and fund my car, from a Mini to a Jaguar.
Feel good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel good car buying, all in one place.
Shouldn't be a carry on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
The loungewear essentials that ease you into your comfort zone. The Fitbit that helps you step up your fitness goals. The yoga mat that turns your lounge into a studio. With a choice of ways to pay, you can enjoy being the best possible you. You can say yes when it matters most at very.co.uk. Goods and services provided by Shop Direct Home Shopping Limited. Credit provided by Shop Direct Finance Company Limited.
Breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Stocks climb alongside global counterparts as major economies edge toward reopening, and policymakers in Japan and Europe seek to reduce pressure on credit markets. The dollar is weaker, and oil is taking another dive. Financial companies are leading those who are gaining. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day here on Bloomberg Radio. The S&P 500 is up 1.4%, up 38. Dow's up 1.2%, up 282, and the NASDAQ is up 1.2%, up 103. The 10-year is down 15.30 seconds with a yield of 0.64%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is down 27% to $12.39 a barrel. COMEX gold is down about 0.6% at $17.25.90 per ounce. The dollar yen, 107.29. The euro, $1.820, and the pound, $1.24.05. Now that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett. Balance of Power continues now with David Weston right here on Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Well, this pandemic has affected certainly the global economy. It's also affected global geopolitics. And when we have questions about geopolitics, we turn to Ian Bremmer. He is president and founder of the Eurasia Group. So, Ian, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it. Let's start with China, because that's where, after all, this coronavirus started. What is this doing to China, both internally and externally?
Well, internally, the fact that Xi Jinping did cover this up for the first month caused enormous opposition to him domestically that they needed to battle. This was by far the biggest crisis that he has faced, just like other leaders around the world. And, of course, since then, their economy is now restarting, and there was a tremendous quarantine. There's a lot of pride around that. But there was still a lot of domestic opposition. On top of that, internationally, the Chinese are the economy that's restarted. That's good for supply chain for them. But they're also increasingly having fingers being pointed at them, especially by the United States. And if it turns out that the United States and China are in a Cold War on the back of Xi Jinping's mishandling of this, again, a big crisis. So, I see a lot of media around the world that says that China's economy is in best shape coming out of this, given the nature of authoritarian state capitalism and surveillance. All true. But But we should recognize that Xi Jinping is actually in more difficult position now than at any point since he started leading. And leaders I've been talking to increasingly question whether it's clear that he would get a third term in 2022. So a lot of domestic polarization in China right now.
Well, that's fascinating. I mean, I thought he was essentially president for life. Do you think that that's in question? And further than that, Ian, if he feels cornered, does that make him more dangerous?
He certainly, when he declared himself, this core leader and ended the term limits in China, that was a very big change from the way we thought about this group of faceless lead bureaucrats that always kind of ruled by consensus. It was moving from that to a more, sort of Russia-style authoritarian leadership. Well, there's a lot of backlash. And again, the scale of this crisis is pretty big. I don't think the story's been written yet, and we have until 2022. But clearly Xi Jinping knows that he has not handled this well on a bunch of fronts. I mean, you remember the initial whistleblower, the one that was punished and eventually caught the coronavirus and died. The Chinese government eventually apologized for having mistreated him and is now considering him a hero. You never see the Chinese leadership do something like that. That happened on Xi Jinping's watch. There's been a lot of that over the last few months. And again, I think the point is that as much as it seems from the West that China is stronger now than they have been historically, let's keep in mind that this is also a really bad recession for China. The economy is going to be harder to manage. It's going to be harder to keep everyone in full employment, harder to get supply and demand back to where it was. That's a problem for Xi Jinping that he never thought he was going to have coming into this year. And there are a lot of people inside the country, leaders in the country, that feel like his style of leadership has actually made China internationally and domestically more vulnerable.
Ian, let's go across the border, as it were, to North Korea. What is your take on what's going on there? Because now we haven't heard really anything out of there for a while. It's strange that there'd be all these rumors about Kim Jong-un and that they hadn't done anything like to show him to us so that would really dispel the rumors.
It's completely unusual. We've had now 2 weeks before he's been seen. There's all sorts of speculation that he's dead. There's no useful on-the-ground intelligence, and if he was fine, they'd be saying something. So, at the very least, I think this is a major health scare. And we saw the Chinese doctors that were sent over the weekend to provide support and obviously get some intelligence for the Chinese government. I mean, the point is that if it turns out that Kim Jong-un is no more, there is no obvious and easy succession plan. I mean, we're all talking about his sister, Kim Yo-jong, but the idea of a woman running North Korea is kind of anathema to North Korean society and governance. The idea of somebody not in Kim Jong-un's family is also inconceivable given the mythology around how leadership has come, directly from the heavens and has been bequeathed through hereditary succession. So it's a little dicey. And, if it turned out that there was in any way a fight internally over power with, a 25 plus nukes and a significant military capacity in the balance, we would see Chinese intervention to ensure it didn't break down.
And Ian, do we have any sense about the coronavirus in North Korea itself?
We have none. They have said for a long time, they said there were no cases. They then admitted that there were a few and that there were harsh penalties for anyone that was seen to bringing in the virus. But there's no, I mean, we don't even have good data from China still on the number of cases they have, the number of deaths we have. In North Korea, the level of opacity is China times 10. So we really have virtually no information other than what we're hearing from the North Koreans themselves. And in the last 2 weeks, that's been effectively nothing.
And it strikes me as deeply ironic, perhaps, that just south of that border, South Korea now is being held up as the example of how you handle this crisis, actually. They're coming out as looking very, very competent.
Yeah, I mean, it's really all the countries in that region because they've spent a lot of time dealing with MERS and SARS, so they're able to fight the last battle. I mean, here in the United States, we get a lot of credit from the way the Fed has responded to the crisis. Why? Well, because we created the rule book in 2008, 2009. We dust off the rule book. We use it again. Well, for a country like South Korea or Hong Kong or Taiwan, Singapore, the countries that have done the best, even Thailand, which we don't talk about as much. There's not as many journalists there, but they're doing a fantastic job. They've got the contact tracing. They did the early testing, the early quarantines. They're responding very well, and it's because they have the experience. They know what this is like. They know the damage it can do to their economy and their population, and they acted quickly. The United States, we think we're invulnerable, invincible. This was a China disease. It wasn't going to come over here. We even remember we wanted to keep those the sick folks on the boat because we didn't want to affect our numbers because we couldn't get it here in the mainland. Well, we're now learning very differently.
Indeed. Okay, Ian Bremmer of Eurasia Group, thank you so much for being with us. I'm delighted to say Ian will be staying with us in the second hour of Balance of Power or on Bloomberg Radio. That starts at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. This is Bloomberg.
In these times...
Oh. Just there, Dave. Smashing. Great. Really? Night, Steve.
Yeah, see ya.
Built to take the big knocks. Samsung rugged devices. Easy to use, hard to break. Explore the Samsung rugged range.
Okay, people, I've got the daily checklist. Who today has ignored a call on purpose? Tick. Talked yourself out of a workout? Tick. Spent far too long scrolling on your phone? Tick. Here's another for your list. BritBox. Streaming the BBC, ITV, Channel 5, and now Channel 4. All in one place and ad-free. So add BritBox to your list and get a 30-day free trial of the biggest box of British box sets. Search BritBox free trial. Tick. Biggest compared to other SVOD providers. Auto-renews at $5.99 a month unless cancelled. T's and C's apply.
Fraudsters are getting more and more sophisticated, and it's easier than ever for people to make an honest mistake and lose their money. TSB doesn't think anyone should have to pay for being an innocent victim of fraud on their account. That's why they've created the TSB Fraud Refund Guarantee. To find out more, visit tsb.co.uk. Terms and conditions apply.
Introducing the new single, Impossible. From Central American rock and blues trio, Steady Rolling. Their epic story of love and loss continues. Download and stream the single, Impossible, from the band Steady Rolling, wherever good music lives.
Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. It's time now for Stock of the Hour. We're taking a look at GM, which is really shoring up its balance sheet, getting new credit lines, also deciding to suspend both dividend and stock buyback plans. And to explain it all to us, we're now joined by Abigail Doolittle. Abigail?
Thanks, David. And, so this is a bit of a defensive move on the part of GM, and it's all tied together because they're extending a credit revolver, and one of the terms to extend that credit revolver, a 3-year credit revolver to 2022, is that they do have to both suspend the buyback and the dividend. But this is not necessarily new because, of course, the auto industry has been in a tough spot over the last couple of years due to the trade war, due to regulations. So over the last 2 years, in 2018 and 2019, there actually wasn't a buyback, but the amount given to the dividend significantly lower than what had been given to both in the 2 years before that. And all of this is also consistent with other defensive moves that they've made recently, David, in terms of nearly 70,000 workers having to defer pay, 20% of their pay for 6 months. They also laid off a number of people, and some of their executives are also taking big pay cuts. The stock had been lower earlier, down about 3.7%, but mid-morning Morgan Stanley did come out saying that this is a smart move, and so we now do have the stock trading higher.
Yeah, and as you suggest, Abigail, this is an industry that's going through transformation anyway, in addition to having to convert over to electric vehicles. Are they in any better or worse shape than their counterparts?
That's an interesting question, David. I think that in terms of this cash preservation, it's probably a pretty good move, and that makes them well positioned. But the overall industry dynamics down 32% in March. That was just a little bit of the lockdown. April will probably be more difficult, so time will tell. But interestingly, Tesla is up on the year, GM down sharply. So from a stock perspective, not so much.
How about that? Tesla is up. Thank you so much to Abigail Doolittle for that report on GM and the auto industry. Coming up on the second hour of Balance of Power on radio, that's at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, we're going to talk to the Lieutenant Governor of Wisconsin, a state that's bitterly divided over reopening the economy. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Pursuits look at luxury in the time of coronavirus. If you haven't heard, we live in Zoom now. Even India's once lavish weddings are taking place over the popular video conferencing platform. With Indian wedding dates often pegged to auspicious astrological times, delaying isn't possible. So instead, during the busiest time in India's $70 billion wedding industry, the virus has helped achieve what the government has been trying to do for years: limit unbridled wedding time extravagance. Meanwhile, wine producers around the world, from Chile to California to Cape Town, are doubling down on the direct-to-consumer sales and virtual tastings via Zoom to stave the loss of restaurant business. The EU, for example, has forecast wine consumption this season to be 8% below the 5-year average. With mostly sparkling and high-value wines affected, exports are expected to fall 14%. Visit BloombergPursuits.com for more. I'm Andrew O'Day, Bloomberg Radio.
There are times when you have to go it alone, but these should not be those times.
Would the medical crisis in any other central bank execute?
Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Jonathan Farrell.
Walk me through the dynamics that are going to shape the euro in the coming months.
Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern.
Do we have the ability to coordinate with this virus?
On Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
When things move this quick, do things break?
Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the lingo.
Jelly. Jelly adjective. Jelly is a shorter, better way to say jealous. As in, Chloe, I am like so jelly of your unicorn phone case.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt US Kids, and the Ad Council.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. I came out in the 11th grade. Nobody was embracing you. The kids were cruel. It was very difficult to be gay. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma. The hard part was determining that I was going to do it, but I definitely didn't do it alone.
At age 30, with the help of her mentor, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
I have a mentor, Maria. She convinced me to continue my education and to finish what I started to get my diploma. Just never judges. She's a true role model. If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, go get it. You can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. A move higher for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. Back to work Monday. Stocks are climbing as major economies edge toward reopening, and policymakers in Japan and Europe seek to reduce pressure on credit markets. The dollar weakened, oil taking another dive. West Texas Intermediate crude plunging 26% today, now at $12.50. Financial companies are leading gains amid a surprisingly good earnings report from Deutsche Bank and continued talk of of easing the lockdowns that have helped contain the coronavirus. Among financial stocks, J.P. Morgan Chase up 3.9%, Citigroup up 6.1%, Bank of America up 4.6%, Wells Fargo up now by 4.1%. The Dow higher by 289 points. That's a gain of 1.2%. S&P up 39, higher by 1.4%. NASDAQ up 105. That is a gain of 1.2%. We've got the 10-year down 15.30 seconds with a yield of 0.64%. Gold is down 1%, 17.12 the ounce. As I mentioned, West Texas Intermediate crude down now by 26%. And with more on the oil story, here's Bloomberg's Renita Young.
When the biggest oil ETF said it will sell out of its June WTI futures position, that added to the downward pressure from a huge oil supply glut. Goldman Sachs says the global oil market will test storage capacity limits in as little as 3 weeks. And gold is swinging between gains and losses as some economies edge toward reopening. Renita Young, Bloomberg Radio.
General Motors is suspending its dividend and the share buyback program that activist investors fought for in the last half-decade as the largest American automaker seeks to preserve cash in the midst of a pandemic that is shutting down much of the global auto industry. GM shares are higher now by 1%, $22.18. 1:02 on Wall Street. Time now for the Market Drivers Report with a focus on American depository receipts. And here is Dave Wilson.
Thanks, Charlie. ADRs are higher along with U.S. shares. The S&P ADR index is up 1.4%, and the S&P 500 is higher by 1.3%. You mentioned Deutsche Bank, Charlie. It's up 12% in U.S. trading. Preliminary first quarter results showed an unexpected profit for the German lender. Revenue held steady rather than falling, as analysts expected in a Bloomberg survey. Other European bank ADRs are also higher. Credit Suisse is up 3.1%, and the Dutch bank ING Group is up 4.7%. Germany's Lufthansa has risen 7.3%. The airline is rallying from a 17-year low after the country's deputy economy minister expressed support for a bailout. Lufthansa has said it won't be able to survive without state aid. One of Lufthansa's peers, Air France-KLM, has lost 5.5% after the French and Dutch governments agreed to provide as much as $12 billion in funding. Now, Air France-KLM had gained 3.6% Friday as deal talks progressed. And Brazil's Embraer has dropped almost 12%. Boeing scrapped a $4.2 billion deal with the plane maker's commercial aircraft unit after years of talks, Charlie.
All right, we thank you very much. Dave Wilson tracking those American depository receipts. Again, recapping, equities higher across the board with the S&P up 36, a gain of 1.3%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Balance of Power.
Everybody in the world has one common enemy, and that's to win the war against this virus.
The first thing you do is listen to the medical professionals.
Those people that lost their pay, we want to see that pay continued.
Where the world of politics meets the world of business.
Our priority is the health and well-being and the lives of the American people.
We want to make sure that we are continuing to support our hospitals.
We've unleashed our most potent weapon of all, the courage of the American people.
Balance of Power with David Weston on Bloomberg Radio.
Hundreds of billions of dollars going to U.S. businesses, but not necessarily to those that need it most. Wisconsin divided over the need to open the economy back up, and Europe divided over a united response to the pandemic. From New York, welcome to the second hour of Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. The European Central Bank meets this week after Madame Lagarde warned that the Eurozone economy could shrink by as much as 15% this year. But the North-South divide over a coordinated response continues to hamper Europe-wide fiscal help. Ian Bremmer, founder and president of the Eurasia Group, is still with us from the first hour of Balance of Power. So, Ian, give us a sense of what's going on in Europe. They keep trying to get a fiscal response together. The North and the South can't quite agree. Is this threatening the entire Eurozone?
I mean, not yet, but it has the potential to become an existential crisis. I mean, the amount of money we're talking about is so much greater than what we saw in the Greek crisis, which almost broke the Eurozone, and that was with much stronger leadership, and the UK part of constructive leaders on board. Here you've got the UK gone, You've got Merkel towards the end of her term, though much more popular, and much more anti-European and anti-establishment sentiment across the board. Plus, the amount you're talking about, part of the reason why why a lot of the northern countries don't want to support debt mutualization is that they believe that that's going to drive their own credit ratings even further down. And so the question is, if you don't end up seeing sustainability that would allow the southern Europeans to grow again, you're going to see the kind of political support for much stronger for those that would call for an unwind. A Salvini in Italy as a future prime minister is where you'd first look to that. But this is going to be broadly experienced across many of the weaker and poorer European countries.
At the same time, is Madame Lagarde and the ECB sort of giving them cover? That is to say, because the ECB is stepping up and saying, we'll buy all the debt you want to issue, that really allows even some of the weaker economies, such as Italy, to borrow more so that they can have their own fiscal stimulus.
Yeah, borrow more, absolutely. So that's why I said I don't think in the short term, I think the money is going to be there. But in terms of whether or not that allows for anything like sustainable growth on the part of countries that don't have the productivity and are going to be massively indebted, to make this work, you're going to need mutualization of debt across the entire Eurozone, poor and wealthy. That we don't think about that in the United States, right? That's not a problem ultimately in America because we have a federal system, but these are ultimately individual countries in Europe, and they've never wanted to address it. It's not like this is a new problem. It's just that coronavirus kind of speeds it up and intensifies it by 10 years in one. And I think that is going to put an undue stress on the structure of the Eurozone.
Is there also pressure potentially on Europe just because of its geographical location? That is to say, it's closer to some of the countries that are going to suffer the most from this coronavirus. We could have some essentially failed states and refugees. There already are issues from Syria, from northern Africa and things like that. Is this going to really put a lot of political pressure on Europe?
Heck, on Turkey. You could absolutely see a failed Turkey that would suddenly cause massively more strain in terms of refugees. But let's keep in mind that what that's really likely to do is reinforce anti-migrant sentiment across the EU as a whole, and particularly in frontline states with little control over who arrives by sea in Italy, in Greece, and Spain. And the reason that's important, and then I'm more optimistic that that's not going to drive a wedge inside the EU, is the reason that caused a problem after the Syrian crisis is because Angela Merkel took the lead and said, I'm going to accept all of these migrants. I'm going to accept 1 million. We've got to stand up for what's right. Well, that basically was the beginning of the end of the Merkel tenure, and she's not going to make that mistake again. There's no one in Europe right now that's going to stand up for looser borders, either in their own countries or going to give the Greeks a hard time for militarizing their border and ensuring that this isn't a problem. This is only going to grow from Africa, North Africa, from the Middle East, and the Europeans are going to be aligned on it.
Ian, finally, bring it back to our hemisphere here, and that is specifically Brazil. Mr. Bolsonaro has a big problem in his hand with his justice minister, not just resigning, but really going out in flames, and now he's under investigation. Is it threatening the Bolsonaro leadership?
Potentially. I mean, there are certainly those who believe that impeachment should now proceed, because the reason that the former justice minister resigned, Mr. Moro, is because Bolsonaro intervened politically to remove the head of his federal police. And the reason we believe that is the case is because he was getting close in an investigation to Bolsonaro's own family. Look, this is the kind of thing that has led to impeachments in the past, including of Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil. For many years, the car wash, the Lava Jato scandal that made their politics the most dysfunctional in the G20. Well, you know what? Brazil's getting that dysfunctionality award yet again, because turns out that Bolsonaro not only has mishandled coronavirus very badly and firing his own well-respected health minister, but also now getting into a huge internal political fight that could very well raise the impeachment specter. For all of the difficulties that Trump has in the politicization and running the United States, Bolsonaro makes him look like Churchill.
And what's it doing to the Brazilian economy at this point?
It's taken a big hit. The currency got savaged last week, but that was mostly because short-term punters were worried that the very strongly respected Paulo Guedes, who is the Minister of Economy, was potentially on the outs and would also leave or get fired. Bolsonaro has come out in the last 24 hours and said quite positively that he has a lot of respect for Guedes and that he's not leaving. The markets have rallied somewhat on that. But certainly as you look at the medium term, Brazil's likely to have a worse economic impact from coronavirus because it's been so mishandled. And the potential of the reformist coalition to unwind in Brazil is also becoming greater.
Ian, thank you so very much for all your time today. That's Ian Brenner of the Eurasia Group. Coming up here, Wisconsin is fighting the coronavirus and fighting with itself about how long people should stay home. We talk with its Lieutenant Governor, Mandela Barnes. That's coming up next on Balance of Power, and we are on Bloomberg Radio.
What began in China has expanded worldwide.
Is it China that's going to lead that consumer recovery?
What have we learned?
I'm curious as to what you're monitoring most closely in the news flow.
What can we predict?
Are you seeing a time when you can expect recovery in global travel?
Bloomberg Daybreak Asia.
Do people realize that those numbers are going to get a lot worse?
Tonight at 6 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that our daughters have what they need to grow and learn. But that isn't the case for nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. that struggle with hunger.
Childhood hunger is a heartbreaking reality that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and provides it to families and children in need.
You can help kids in need in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Are you interested in a challenging one where you can be part of solving complex challenges across industries and geographies? Bloomberg's ever-expanding technology, data, news, and media services foster innovation, empower clients, and offer nearly limitless opportunities for career growth. Visit Bloomberg.com/careers today to view our current job opportunities. Bloomberg LP is an equal opportunity employer. The address once again is Bloomberg.com/careers.
Hope you enjoyed your meal. And I just want to say, he's lucky to have a brother like you.
Lucky? Caring for my brother is far from easy. But he's a part of me, like my arms and legs, so I'll be his. No time for tired. Nothing can disable this love. He needs me, but I'm the lucky one, even though I need help now and then.
If you're caring for a loved one, visit aarp.org/caregiving for care guides and community. Support for your strength. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
The market's info.
Oh. Just there, Dave. Smashing. Great. Really? Night, Steve. Yeah, see ya. Built to take the big knocks. Samsung rugged devices. Easy to use, hard to break. Explore the Samsung rugged range.
The loungewear essentials that ease you into your comfort zone. The Fitbit that helps you step up your fitness goals. The yoga mat that turns your lounge into a studio. With a choice of ways to pay, you can enjoy being the best possible you. You can say yes when it matters most at very.co.uk. Goods and services provided by Shop Direct Home Shopping Limited. Credit provided by Shop Direct Finance Company Limited.
Okay, people, I've got the daily checklist. Who today has ignored a call on purpose? Tick. Talked yourself out of a workout? Tick. Spent far too long scrolling on your phone? Tick. Here's another for your list. BritBox. Streaming the BBC, ITV, Channel 5, and now Channel 4. All in one place and ad-free. So add BritBox to your list and get a 30-day free trial of the biggest box of British box sets. Search BritBox free trial. Tick. Biggest compared to other SVOD providers. Auto-renews at $5.99 a month unless cancelled. T's and C's apply.
Typical Danny. Imagine trying to unwind at a spa weekend and you wind up getting your mud pack all over your fave personalised dressing gown. But no worries. Just one wash and my clothes will smell perf with Surf. Surf gives you long-lasting fragrance with natural essential oils. Find your fragrance in Surf's laundry range.
Fraudsters are getting more and more sophisticated, and it's easier than ever for people to make an honest mistake and lose their money. TSB doesn't think anyone should have to pay for being an innocent victim of fraud on their account. That's why they've created the TSB Fraud Refund Guarantee. To find out more, visit tsb.co.uk. Terms and conditions apply.
Introducing the new single, Impossible. From Central American rock and blues trio, Steady Rolling. Their epic story of love and loss continues. Download and stream the single, Impossible, from the band Steady Rolling, wherever good music lives.
We need to tackle coronavirus together. You can help by not travelling unless it is absolutely essential. With limited staff, TfL is only supporting those people making essential journeys. No one else should be travelling. If you must travel, try to avoid the busy times, particularly the early morning. We have already seen fewer people using our services. London, together we can all do our bit. Stay at home, do not travel, save lives.
Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your seventh inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, oh, well, Jeter Downs didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course. Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting Nine podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into the top spot for a favorite baseball player. Active in the league right now. It is a pleasure to be sitting next to you, sir.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is, we've been waiting a long time for this. We actually, in terms of active
round the bases with the StatCast podcast.
Ways of going about it. I picked third, so in some ways it made it easier for me. Mike, just to go over the first couple of picks, Mike took Barry Bonds, who I think was kind of the obvious guy to take number one, not only.
Catch these and more MLB podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We've got stocks close to session highs. U.S. equity markets climbing along global counterparts as major economies edge toward reopening, and policymakers in Japan and Europe sought to reduce pressure on credit markets. Oil, though, taking another dive today. We've got West Texas Intermediate crude down 25%, now at $12.67 a barrel. Gold is down 1%, $17.12 the ounce. The 10-year down 13.30 seconds, the yield there 0.64%. S&P up 35, up 1.3%. The Dow up 269, up 1.1%. NASDAQ up 88. That is a gain also of 1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thanks so much, Charlie Pellet. From New York, this is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio. Wisconsin has not been hit as hard as some states by the coronavirus, but it is fighting hard to make sure it doesn't get worse, with the governor extending a lockdown until late May, something that is not particularly popular with at least some people in the state. Welcome now Mandela Barnes, Lieutenant Governor of Wisconsin. So thank you so much, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, for being with us. Give us a sense of the virus. Before we get to the protests and things, let's talk about what's really going on in the state with people's lives and their health. What's the state of the coronavirus in Wisconsin today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot for having me. We are just under 6,000 cases as of today. There will be a briefing in a couple hours, and I'm sure that number is going to spike. There have been 272 deaths here in the state of Wisconsin as well. And while we might not be as bad as other states, our trajectory has not been great over the last several days. We've seen our largest single-day increases on consecutive days, which is very frustrating. However, we have not met what the projections showed us potentially hitting, and that's because of the safer home measures. So it's very important for us to look at ways to make sure that we can continue to stop the spread of COVID-19. What we've been doing has been working so far, but we've had outbreaks in Green Bay, Wisconsin, at a meat processing plant. You've seen these instances in a few spots across the country as well. So we're doing everything that we can do, and we are following the science. That's how we're making our decisions.
You know, I was going to ask you about the meatpacking plants, so let's go there right now because you took us there. What is the situation with the meatpacking plants? Because we're seeing that not just in Wisconsin, but certainly in Wisconsin, and some people even raising questions about the supply chain for food.
Yeah, I mean, it's a scary thing. And you know, when you look at reopening the economy, quote unquote, it's about safety. It's about making sure that people are, you know, taking the precautions that are necessary and making sure that workspaces, that there is adequate distance between people in workspaces. And that's not always possible to enforce in every possible instance. So you see people in confined spaces, like at a meat processing plant, where folks end up contracting the virus at higher rates. And, you know, that accounted for the majority of our state spike there in Green Bay. And that has been closed. Federal investigation underway, or that will be starting shortly, just to see exactly what went on there.
So let's turn to the divisions within the state. It's getting a lot of coverage, including in the national press. The New York Times just over the weekend had a piece saying that a few thousand people gathered at the state capitol on Friday. What do you make of these protests?
You know, the protests are unfortunate. There is some real pain that people are feeling, but I feel that pain is being exploited by some other factions that have very little to do with opening up the state of Wisconsin. You see people's frustration being co-opted by whether it's militia groups or some very staunch gun rights advocates. That's what the protest became. It was more of a Trump rally than anything, while we're working to solve this crisis and make sure that the folks who are dealing with their struggling small businesses, while we're trying to make sure that we can make these communities whole again, it's unfortunate you have folks that want to get out there and turn it into something completely different that has very little to do with the actual situation that we're in. But they saw a moment. They took advantage of it. And a lot of that is very parallel to the way that the Trump candidacy in 2015 and 16 became the Trump presidency of now.
Well, that's one of the questions. Those of us who don't live in Wisconsin have a sense that it's a pretty much divided state, that there are some really diehard Republicans and a fair number of diehard Democrats as well. Is that a fair representation? And how broad is the support for the idea that you really should back off of your stay safe at home policy?
Oh, no. The latest polling show overwhelming majority of Wisconsinites who are in favor of the governor's safer at home orders. And it does touch on the first point you made about Wisconsin being fairly divided. Donald Trump, that election in 2016 was decided by less than 1%. Our race in 2018, when we were elected, was just over 1% of the vote. So we've seen some very, very close elections. Wisconsin can go either way. And the fact of the matter is, with us having wide support across the entire state for the safer home order, it shows that the direction that we're taking is working. And people understand why we need to do this. Folks see the amount of death. People see the amount of the sickness that's plaguing communities, and they don't want any part of it. They want to do things the safe way. They want to do things the right way.
So one of the issues that's really pending in Washington right now is the extent to which states need more support because they're both losing tax revenues and incurring extraordinary costs. What's the situation in Wisconsin?
I want to thank you for bringing that up because the previous administration, the previous governor, implemented a 1-week waiting period for unemployment benefits. And with that being in place, Wisconsin is going to lose out on $25 million of federal reimbursement. And so we are going to have to pay for that out of the state's revenue, which is projected to have a sharp decline given the economic condition that we're facing right now. So we do need help from the federal government on multiple fronts. We need to make sure that there's more testing available. There's more PPE equipment available for the national stockpile. And we also have to, get the support that we need when it comes to making up for the revenue losses.
Give me 1 second here on your pension situation, because President Trump today tweeted out saying we shouldn't bail out states who have too much pensions they can't afford. What's Wisconsin's situation with your funded and unfunded pensions?
Wisconsin has one of the healthiest pensions in the nation. We have one of the strongest retirement systems around out of any public retirement system in America.
So we wouldn't be bailing out your pension system if we gave you some money?
Say that again?
We wouldn't be bailing out your pension system if we gave you some money from the federal government.
No. The money from the federal government will help everyday Wisconsinites be able to get by.
Okay, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us today. That's Wisconsin Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. Coming up, restaurants are being decimated by the shutdown of the economy. But does insurance cover at least some of those losses? We talk with the head of the American Property and Casualty Insurance Association, David Sampson. That's coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. U.S. stocks are climbing as major economies edge toward reopening, and financial companies are leading today's gains on a surprisingly good earnings report from Deutsche Bank. The Dow is up 291 points, NASDAQ up 103, S&P 500 up 40 points. You can add getting your next iPhone to the growing list of plans being delayed by the coronavirus pandemic. Apple is pushing back production of its iPhones by about a month. And there are more worries about a possible meat shortage. Almost 1/3 of the nation's pork plants are now temporarily closed as COVID-19 sickens employees. And Americans stuck inside their homes are eating a lot more avocado toast and guacamole. The price of a box of avocados from Mexico shot up 60% in the past 6 weeks. Donna Wilson, Bloomberg Radio.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
The world's financial decision makers connect on the Bloomberg terminal. The buy side and the sell side together, collaborating across markets and countries in real time, sharing ideas, negotiating trades, and forming an influential network of over 325,000 financial professionals that helps power global markets. Isn't it time you join them? Request a demo at Bloomberg.com/professional.
Are you interested in...
Okay, people, I've got the daily checklist. Who today has eaten dinner for breakfast? Started a chore you'll never finish. Done a conference call in your pajamas. Tick. Here's another for your list. BritBox. Streaming the BBC, ITV, Channel 5, and now Channel 4. All in one place and ad-free. So add BritBox to your list and get a 30-day free trial of the biggest box of British box sets. Search BritBox. Free trial. Tick. Biggest compared to other SVOD providers. Auto-renews at $5.99 a month unless cancelled. T's and C's apply.
Typical Danny. Last night I was chilling with my girls, but ended up spilling my Chardonnay all over my fave lilac nightie when I saw the photo I was tagged in. State of my fake tan. But no worries. Just one wash and my clothes will smell perf with Surf. Surf gives you long-lasting fragrance with natural essential oils. Find your fragrance in Surf's laundry range.
While most of us are looking out for each other at this time, sadly, fraudsters are trying to take advantage of the situation. Here's Chris Ainsley from Santander with advice for keeping your money safe.
Please be wary of people you've met online who claim to be stranded abroad and urgently need money. Always take time to think before you act, and if you think you're the victim of fraud, then let your bank know right away.
For more advice on keeping your money safe, visit santander.co.uk.
We need to tackle coronavirus together. You can help by not travelling unless it is absolutely essential. With limited staff, TfL is only supporting those people making essential journeys. No one else should be travelling. If you must travel, try to avoid the busy times, particularly the early morning. We have already seen fewer people using our services. London, together we can all do our bit. Stay at home, do not travel, save lives.
This week on the New Yorker Radio Hour, our writers fan out to report from across the city at the height of the coronavirus outbreak in New York.
I won't say it's business as usual, but, we still have responsibilities and we are handling everything. But, I'm not going to let COVID beat me.
That's the New Yorker Radio Hour from WNYC Studios. Listen to this episode on TuneIn today.
Get your daily dose of NFL shop talk with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Start your morning off right with Around the NFL.
Injured, depleted roster into the playoffs, and I didn't think they belonged in the playoffs.
I think overall, though, it was a great divisional round weekend because you got the first one.
Run into the end zone with the Move the Sticks podcast.
We had a fun little Zoom cocktail hour last night.
Oh, yeah.
What a star-studded affair. Greg, you were there for the earlier part, but it really popped off a little later on. We had Zach Goldman.
And dive deep into the sidelines with the Peter King podcast.
On the occasion of his 50th birthday, come down and record a little bit of retrospective on the life and times of Brett Lorenzo Favre.
That sounds like a bestseller.
It sounds like a precursor to a funeral. That's what it is.
I wasn't thinking that.
Explore these and more hard-hitting NFL podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Balance of Power with David Weston.
Coming up on Balance of Power, business interruption insurance. Does it cover something as dramatic as the pandemic? The CEO of the Property and Casualty Trade Association, David Sampson, is here to give us his view. But first, let's get a market check with Charlie Pellet.
And I thank you very much, David Weston. Happy Monday. We've got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing as major economies edge toward reopening, and policymakers in Japan and Europe seek to reduce pressure on credit markets. The dollar is weakening, oil taking another dive. Let's begin there with West Texas Intermediate crude plunging 20% today, down now by $3.45 at $13.48 a barrel. Crude falling as the biggest oil ETF says it will sell out of June WTI futures, and that's adding to downward pressure on crude. Jeff Curry is head of commodities research at Goldman Sachs.
Over the next 3 to 4 weeks, the world's going to hit storage capacity constraints and really test those nameplate capacities. When they do that, once you hit those capacity limits, supply has to equal demand no matter what globally. That's when you're going to see the really large production cuts.
And again, West Texas Intermediate crude down 20%, $13.58 a barrel among some of the oil names today. ExxonMobil down 0.5%. Chevron up 1.8%. ConocoPhillips up by 1.6%. Equity markets higher across the board with the S&P up 33, up by 1.2%. The Dow up 247 now, up 1%. NASDAQ is up 75. That is a gain of 0.9%. Should point out that the Dow, by the way, now at 24,022. The 10-year down 13.30 seconds. The yield 0.64%. Again, gold down by 1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Balance of Power continues, the Monday edition. Once again, here's your host, David Weston.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. Restaurants across the country have been shut down, at least for eat-in dining, for weeks now, and have had to lay off hundreds of thousands of employees. Many of them have insurance, but not necessarily business interruption insurance that covers a pandemic, something that's caught the attention of some in Congress and in the White House. David Sampson is the president and CEO of the American Property and Casualty Insurance Association, and we welcome him now to Bloomberg. So thank you so much, David, for joining us. I had not focused on this issue at all. Just lay it out for those of us who don't follow this closely. Is business interruption insurance fairly standard for restaurants, but does it cover pandemics?
Well, today, David, thank you for having me on today. First of all, we need to acknowledge that we're living in a time right now where people are afraid for their lives and their livelihoods during this pandemic, and it's caused an unprecedented economic catastrophe in the United States. With respect to your question about business interruption insurance, it is a form of property insurance that covers physical damage to a business from disasters like hurricanes or wildfires. However, they generally do not cover viruses or pandemics, and there have been exclusions in those policies at least since the very early 2000s with the first SARS epidemic. Pandemics are uninsured because they are uninsurable events. By their very nature, pandemics hit all over the world at the same time. There's no way to diversify risk. And as we're seeing right now, the economic disruption that's caused by a complete economic shutdown in a pandemic is something that only the federal government has the scale to be able to address.
So if I understand you correctly, I couldn't buy, let's go before this pandemic, I couldn't buy insurance covering a pandemic even if I wanted to, no matter what the insurance premium is.
Well, there are what's called manuscripted policies. They're not standard insurance policies. There are a very few manuscripted policies or bespoke or custom insurance policies where pandemic was offered on the market, but there was virtually no take-up rate for that because of the factors I've just mentioned. The premiums would be almost unaffordable for any company. And I should point out that business interruption insurance is only bought by, at most, a third of all small businesses in the United States. So it is an optional add-on coverage to basic property insurance, and it's not a widely purchased policy even prior to the pandemic. But since you're right, since the early 2000s and the first SARS epidemic, there were exclusions on the standard insurance policies that were sold. It should be remembered that insurance is a very highly regulated industry, both for market conduct and solvency by state insurance commissioners. And what that means is that before you can sell a policy in a state, an insurance company can sell a policy in a state, whether it's a personal lines policy or a commercial lines policy, the policy forms have to be pre-approved by the state insurance department. And in that form is very explicitly laid out what's covered and what's not covered. And these pandemic exclusions or viral exclusions with underlying property damage as a prerequisite for business interruption insurance is clearly laid out in these policy forms, and that's why the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, now about 3 weeks ago, early on in this pandemic, issued a very strong statement explaining to businesses that pandemic or viral coverage is not included in standard business interruption policies.
So, David, the way you lay this out, and it's very clear, it seems fairly cut and dried. So what's the dispute about? Because as I understand it, there's a lot of lawsuits threatened in various states, as well as some congressional activity possible. So what's the dispute? Because it sounds like it's pretty cut and dried, and we know what the rules are.
Well, I think the dispute is, I think it is a pretty clear cut when you read the plain language of the insurance.
But what are the restaurateurs on the other side of the argument arguing?
They're arguing that that they were shut down because of civil authority provision. A number of cities and states have issued mandatory stay-at-home orders or dine only curbside pickup or delivery. And they're saying that the civil authority provision within business insurance contracts trigger a business insurance coverage.
I see. So they're saying I'm just trying to understand their argument. But so how likely is it that Congress might act?
Well, I think what our focus is right now, first of all, I do not think that the Congress of the United States is going to pass legislation that would require mandatory retroactive virus or pandemic coverage for business insurance policies. I mean, we still have a Constitution of the United States which prevents retroactive legislation. But I do think that the center of attention right now, and certainly our center of attention, is to work to try and advance public policy that will inject liquidity into not just restaurants, but all small businesses in the U.S. Yeah. Our numbers indicate that small businesses with 100 or fewer employees are losing about somewhere between $255 billion and $431 billion per month. Right. And that's why the Paycheck Protection Plan ran out of money within the first 2 weeks of its operation. And the replenished fund is likely to run out of money before the end of this week. There needs to be a longer-term solution, and we are working with over 60 business trade associations who have signed on to support the Employer and Small Business Continuity Fund. And I believe that that's the avenue that's most likely to provide additional, ongoing, much-needed relief, not only to restaurants, but to all small businesses in the U.S.
And by the way, the members of your organization aren't going to benefit if they lose all the customers who are paying for insurance premiums, so we've got to do something to keep them going. Okay, thank you so much. It's really great to have you with us, David. This is David Sampson of the American Property and Casualty Insurance Association. Coming up here, speculation over the health of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. We talk with a North Korea expert, Jim Walsh of MIT's Security
Y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
25 years ago, NJIT graduates